The first gunshot shattered the peaceful evening, ripping through the crisp lakeside air like a crack of thunder. My brain barely had time to register the shock before a searing pain exploded in my foot, knocking me backward onto the gravel with a thud that echoed in my skull. Blood pooled around me, warm and sticky, staining the earth as my breath came in ragged gasps. Through the haze of agony, I saw her, Maggie, standing there, hands shaking, eyes wide and gleaming with an unsettling mix of rage and conviction. Maggie was the same woman who had spent months terrorizing me over my so-called crimes against nature. The same neighbor who once berated me for eating a turkey sandwich on my porch was now standing over me with a gun. She muttered something under her breath, her voice unsteady yet dripping with self-righteous fury. "You left me no choice," she whispered, her knuckles white around the pistol grip. "I warned you. You refused to listen. You kept murdering them." Her gaze flickered to the still-smoking grill beside my deck, where my dinner, 2 fresh fish caught from my own lake, had been sizzling just moments ago. I could barely comprehend it. The woman who preached peace, nonviolence, and the sanctity of all living creatures had just put a bullet in me. And for what? For grilling dinner on my own property? For daring to fish in a lake that had belonged to my family for generations? The absurdity of it would have been almost comical if not for the excruciating pain radiating from my foot and the horrifying realization that she still had the gun aimed at me. This wasn't just another one of her ridiculous rants about animal rights or a protest against my barbaric lifestyle. This was something far worse. She had snapped. She had actually done it. The thing is, I should have seen it coming. I had ignored the warning signs for months, dismissing her increasingly erratic behavior as just another case of an overly enthusiastic activist with too much time on her hands. But Maggie was never just enthusiastic. She was obsessed. It started small, almost laughably so. The first time I met Maggie, she marched right up to me while I was unloading groceries from my truck and introduced herself with a disapproving frown. "I hope you don't eat meat," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "The smell of cooking flesh makes me physically ill." I remember standing there momentarily stunned, a pack of steak in one hand and a bag of charcoal in the other. Yeah, I eat meat," I had replied, thinking it was just a weird opening line, some kind of awkward joke. It wasn't. Maggie's expression twisted into one of pure disgust, as if I had just admitted to kicking puppies for fun. "That's unfortunate," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "I suggest you educate yourself. Meat is murder. Animals are sentient beings. You wouldn't eat your dog, would you?" I blinked at her, debating whether I should even engage. I wouldn't grill my dog in the backyard if that's what you're asking," I said, trying to keep the mood light. Maggie didn't find it funny. "I'll be keeping an eye on things," she warned before stomping away, clipboard in hand, as if she had just conducted some kind of official neighborhood inspection. I shrugged it off at the time, figuring she was just one of those overzealous activists who'd get bored and move on once she realized no one in town was interested in debating her philosophy every time they wanted to eat a burger. I couldn't have been more wrong. Within a week, Maggie's presence became impossible to ignore. She didn't just disapprove of meat, she actively policed it. If she so much as smelled someone barbecuing in their yard, she'd march over uninvited and launch into a speech about the horrors of factory farming, the suffering of animals, and the moral depravity of carnivores. I heard from a neighbor that she once stood outside his house for over an hour with a protest sign while he was trying to cook dinner for his family. "Stop the bloodshed. Choose compassion," the sign read in bold red letters. At first, people found it annoying but tolerable. They'd roll their eyes, shut their doors, and wait for her to leave. But she never left. If anything, she escalated. She started hanging around the local grocery store, peering into people's carts, shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment when she spotted a pack of bacon or a carton of eggs. She even confronted the store manager, demanding they dedicate more shelf space to plant-based alternatives and remove the offensive meat displays near the entrance. The manager, to his credit, laughed her out of the store, but that only seemed to fuel her determination. As irritating as she was to the whole neighborhood, I had the misfortune of being her primary target. The reason? My lake, a few acres of private water nestled behind my house, passed down through generations. A place where I had fished with my grandfather as a kid, where my father had taught me how to cast a line. To me, it was more than just a fishing spot. It was home, history, tradition. To Maggie, it was a crime scene. The first time she caught me fishing, she acted like I had personally drowned a baby seal in front of her. "What do you think you're doing?" She shrieked from the other side of the fence, her hands gripping the wooden slats so tightly her knuckles turned white. I turned to her, confused. Fishing?" Her face contorted in fury. "That's not fishing. That's kidnapping. You're stealing lives. Those fish have families. Do you even think about what they go through?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "They're fish, Maggie. They don't have families. They have emotions," she howled. "They feel pain. They have dreams." That was the first time I realized just how deep her fanaticism ran. But it wouldn't be the last. What started as verbal harassment quickly turned into vandalism. I put up private property and no trespassing signs. They were torn down within days. I installed security cameras. They mysteriously got spray painted over. Then the real insanity began. Maggie started feeding the lake. I woke up one morning to find piles of rotting vegetables and breadcrumbs floating near the shore, an attempt, I assumed, to free the fish from their carnivorous oppressor, me. I confronted her, of course, but she just smirked, arms crossed, as if she had just won some great ideological battle. "If you refuse to stop hurting them," she said, "then I will make sure they don't need you." At that point, I should have called the police. But part of me still thought she was just an overzealous activist playing a harmless, albeit annoying, prank. Criminal? Not yet. Then she started watching me. Every time I stepped outside with my fishing rod, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in her upstairs window, her silhouette barely hidden behind the curtains, binoculars in hand. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. One evening, I walked outside carrying a bag of groceries, and before I even reached the porch, she was already there, standing at the property line. "I can smell it," she whispered. "You reek of death." At that moment, a chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't just activism. This wasn't even harassment anymore. This was something else, something dangerous. Now, as I lay here clutching my bleeding foot, my vision swimming with pain, I finally understood just how far she was willing to go. I had underestimated her. I had thought she was just an over-the-top nuisance, but Maggie had never been harmless. She had been spiraling from the moment she moved in. I woke up in a haze of pain and confusion, the sterile scent of antiseptic burning my nostrils before my vision even fully returned. The steady beeping of medical monitors pulsed in the background, a rhythmic reminder that I was still alive. My foot throbbed in protest as I shifted slightly, sending a fresh wave of agony up my leg. It took me a moment to remember where I was, to piece together the fragments of what had happened, the gunshot, the gravel, the blood, Maggie. The sheer insanity of it all slammed into me like a freight train, making my pulse spike as flashes of her unhinged face hovered in my mind. I wasn't just shot. I was shot by the world's most militant vegan, a woman who had spent months harassing me about the morality of fishing, who had gone from screaming about animal rights to pulling a trigger like it was the only logical next step. And now I was lying in a hospital bed, bandaged up, lucky to be alive, while she was probably sitting in a jail cell, still convinced she was some kind of hero. The absurdity of it should have made me laugh, but there was nothing funny about knowing that my life had nearly ended because a neighbor had taken her moral crusade too far. The trial was set to begin in a few weeks, and I had already given my statement to the DA. But no matter how much they reassured me that this was an easy conviction, that Maggie was going away for a long time, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, someway, she would find a way to ruin my life all over again. The media certainly wasn't helping. The narrative they had built around her had already taken on a life of its own, turning her from a violent, unstable extremist into some kind of misguided activist who had simply been pushed too far. Even after she nearly killed me, there were people defending her, calling her a warrior, a woman who had been forced to take drastic measures because no one would listen to her pleas. Some of the more unhinged supporters even started sending me messages online, calling me a murderer, a monster, saying I deserved what happened to me, that they wish she had aimed higher. It was insane, completely and utterly insane, but it was happening. And no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, to pretend like it didn't bother me, I couldn't. Because this wasn't just about Maggie anymore. This had become something much bigger, and I was stuck in the middle of it, whether I liked it or not. When the trial finally began, I forced myself to sit through every single day of it, even though every moment made my skin crawl. Maggie, unsurprisingly, showed no remorse. If anything, She looked proud, sitting there with the same smug expression she had worn every time she lectured me about my supposed crimes against nature. Her lawyer tried to paint her as someone who had simply snapped under the weight of her convictions, that she had never intended to actually hurt me, that the gun had gone off by accident. It was complete and utter nonsense, and the prosecution tore it apart with ease, showing the jury the months of documented harassment, the vandalism, the trespassing, the threats, and, of course, the footage of her standing over me, gun in hand, whispering about how I had forced her to do it. It should have been a slam dunk, an easy conviction. But still, I couldn't relax, not when Maggie had already proven just how far she was willing to go. Then the moment came. The defense called Maggie to the stand, and as soon as she opened her mouth, it was clear she wasn't going to play the remorseful victim. No, she was going to double down, just like she always did. I had no choice, she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion, her eyes scanning the jury as if she expected them to nod along with her delusions. No one would listen. I tried everything, protests, education, even pleading with him directly. But he refused to stop the slaughter. Every single day, more innocent lives were lost, the fish, the animals. All of them suffered while he laughed in my face. What was I supposed to do? Just stand by and watch? I acted out of necessity, out of desperation. And I would do it again if I had to. A murmur spread through the courtroom, some gasps, some whispers, but all I could do was stare at her in disbelief. She wasn't even trying to defend herself. She was admitting to everything, and yet somehow she still thought she was the hero in this story. The prosecutor wasted no time tearing her apart. So, just to be clear, he said, his voice dripping with controlled disdain, you believe that shooting an unarmed man on his own property was justified? That this was some kind of noble act? Maggie lifted her chin, her eyes burning with defiance. I believe, she said slowly, deliberately, that sometimes drastic measures are required for the greater good. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her lawyer's expression: panic. He knew she had just sealed her own fate. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty on all charges. The judge didn't hold back either, sentencing her to a lengthy prison term that ensured she wouldn't be terrorizing anyone for a long time. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was exhausted. As they led her out of the courtroom, she turned to look at me one last time, and for a split second, I saw something that sent an icy chill down my spine. A smile. A knowing, twisted little smile, like she knew something I didn't. Like she still believed she had one, somehow. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life, to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But it was easier said than done. Even with Maggie behind bars, the damage she had done lingered. My lake, my home, everything felt different now, like a crime scene I couldn't escape from. The media circus eventually died down, moving on to the next outrageous story. But every now and then, I would still get a message, an email, some unhinged comment from a stranger calling me a monster, a murderer, all because I had dared to fish in my own lake. It was a constant reminder that no matter what happened to Maggie, there would always be others like her, people so consumed by their own warped sense of morality that they were willing to justify anything, even violence, in the name of their cause. One evening, as I sat on my porch staring out at the water, I realized something. No matter what, I refused to let her take this from me. My peace, my home, my love for fishing. She had already taken enough, and I wasn't going to let her take any more. So I picked up my fishing rod, walked to the shore, and cast my line. The ripples spread out across the water, gentle and endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Maggie might have tried to destroy my life, but in the end, she had failed, because I was still here,